Hello there, and welcome to Sleepy Nights. Tonight, we'll fall asleep to an ancient folklore tale. During the reign of good King Arthur and his Queen Guinevere, there lived near Land's End in Cornwall a farmer who had one son named Jack. Jack was quick-witted and clever, with a sharp mind that no one could outwit him. In those days, St. Michael's Mount in Cornwall served as the stronghold of an enormous giant named Cormoran. He stood 18 feet tall, with a girth of 3 yards around his middle, possessed a grim and fierce face, and terrorized the entire countryside. He lived in a cave among the rocky crags of the mount, and whenever he wanted food, he would wade across the tides to the mainland and take whatever he pleased. Both poor and rich folk alike fled from their houses and hid when they heard the splash of his massive feet in the water. For if he spotted them, he thought nothing of roasting 6 people for his breakfast. As it was, he seized their cattle by the score, carrying off 6 fat oxen on his back at once, and hanging sheep and pigs from his belt, just like bunches of candles. Now this had continued for many years, and the poor people of Cornwall despaired, for no one could put an end to the giant Cormoran. And so, one market day, Jack, then quite a young man, found the town in uproar over some fresh outrage by the giant. Women wept, men cursed, and the magistrates sat in council, debating what could be done. But none could suggest a plan. And so then Jack, cheerful and confident, approached the magistrates, and with fine courtesy, for he was always very polite. And he asked what reward would be given to whoever killed the giant Cormoran. "Oh, the treasures of the giant's cave," they replied. "Really? Every bit of it?" asked Jack, who was never satisfied with half measures. "Oh, yes, to the last penny," they confirmed. "All right then, I will undertake this task," said Jack, and immediately set about the business. Now, it was around winter time, and having acquired a horn, a pickaxe, and shovel. He crossed to the mount in the dark evening and set to work. Before dawn, he had dug a pit no less than 22 feet deep and nearly as wide. He covered this with long, thin sticks and straw, sprinkling loose soil over everything to make it appear like solid ground. And so, just as dawn approached, he positioned himself on the side of the pit farthest from the giant's cave, raised the horn to his lips, and with full force sounded, "Tantivy, Tantivy, Tantivy," just as if he were hunting a fox. This naturally woke the giant, who rushed out of his cave in a rage. Seeing little Jack standing there boldly blowing his horn, calm and cool as could be, Cormoran became even more furious and charged toward the disturber of his rest, bellowing, "I'll teach you to wake a giant, you little pest. You'll pay dearly for your horn blowing. I'll take you and roast you whole for breakfast." He had gotten no further when crash, the giant fell into the pit. The impact was so tremendous that it shook the foundations of the mount. But Jack shook with laughter. "Ho, ho," he cried. "How about breakfast now, Sir Giant? Will you have me roasted or baked? Will nothing satisfy your appetite but poor little Jack? By my faith, I've got you trapped now. You're locked up for bad behavior, and I'll torment you as I please. I wish I had rotten eggs, but this will do just as well." With that, he raised his pickaxe and dealt the giant Cormoran such a mighty blow to the crown of his head that he killed the giant instantly. Jack then calmly filled the pit with earth and went to search the cave, where he found much treasure. When the magistrates heard of Jack's great exploit, they proclaimed henceforth he should be known as Jack the Giant Killer. They even presented him with a sword and belt on which these words were embroidered in gold: "Here's the valiant Cornishman who slew the giant Cormoran." News of Jack's victory soon spread throughout England, reaching another giant named Blunderbore. who lived to the north. Upon hearing of it, he vowed that if he ever encountered Jack, he would have his revenge. This giant Blunderbore was lord of an enchanted castle that stood in the middle of a lonely forest. About 4 months after killing Cormoran, Jack had occasion to journey into Wales. On the road, he passed through this forest, and weary from walking, found a pleasant fountain by the wayside. He lay down to rest, and soon fell fast asleep. Now the giant, Blunderbore, coming to the well for water, found Jack sleeping, and recognized by the embroidered words on his belt that here was the famous giant killer. Delighted by his luck, the giant lifted Jack to his shoulder without ceremony, and began carrying him through the wood to the enchanted castle. It was the rustling of branches that awakened Jack, who found himself already in the giant's clutches and was terrified. His alarm increased when he saw the castle courtyard strewn with human bones. "Yours will join them soon enough," said Blunderbore, as he locked poor Jack in an enormous chamber above the castle gateway. The room had a high-pitched, beamed roof, and one window that looked down the road. Here, Jack was to remain while Blunderbore went to fetch his brother giant, who lived in the same wood, so they might share the feast. Now, after some time, Jack, watching through the window, saw the two giants tramping hastily down the road, both eager for their dinner. Now, Jack said to himself, "My death or my deliverance is at hand." He had devised a plan. In one corner of the room, he had spotted 2 strong cords. Taking these, he made a cunning noose at the end of each and hung them out the window. As the giants unlocked the iron gate below, he managed to slip the nooses over their heads without noticing. Then, quick as a thought, he tied the other ends to a beam, so that as the giants moved forward, the nooses tightened and strangled them until their faces turned black. Seeing this, Jack slid down the ropes and, drawing his sword, killed them both taking the castle keys, he unlocked all the doors and freed 3 beautiful ladies whom he found tied by their hair and nearly starved to death. "Sweet ladies," said Jack, kneeling on one knee, for he was always polite. "Here are the keys to this enchanted castle. I have destroyed the giant Blunderbore and his brutal brother, thus restoring your liberty. These keys should provide you with all else you require." So saying, he continued his journey to Wales. He travelled as quickly as he could, perhaps too quickly, for he lost his way and found himself benighted and far from any dwelling. He wandered on hopefully until, entering a narrow valley, he came upon a very large, dreary-looking house standing alone. Anxious for shelter, he approached the door and knocked. You can imagine his surprise and alarm when a giant with 2 heads answered his summons. Though this monster's appearance was exceedingly fierce, his manners were quite polite. The truth was that he was a Welsh giant, and as such was double-faced and smooth, inclined to achieve his malicious ends through false friendship. So, he welcomed Jack heartily in, with a strong Welsh accent, prepared a bedroom for him, leaving him with kind wishes for a good rest. Jack, however, was too tired to sleep well, and as he lay awake, he overheard his host muttering in the next room. Having very keen ears, he made out these words: "Though here you lodge with me this night, shall not see the morning light. My club shall dash your brains outright." "Is that so?" said Jack to himself, starting up at once. "So that's your Welsh trick, is it? Well, I'll be ready for you." Leaving his bed, he placed a large piece of wood among the blankets, and taking one blanket to keep warm, made himself comfortable in a corner of the room, pretending to snore to make the giant think he was asleep. Sure enough, after a little while, the monster crept in on tiptoe, carrying a large club. Then, whack, whack, whack. Jack could hear the bed being pummeled, till the giant, thinking every bone in his guest's body must be broken, stole out of the room again. Jack then calmly returned to bed and slept soundly. The next morning, the giant couldn't believe his eyes when he saw Jack coming downstairs fresh and hearty. "Good heavens," he cried, astonished. "Did you sleep well? Did you feel nothing in the night?" "Oh," replied Jack, laughing to himself. "I think a little rat came and gave me 2 or 3 taps with his tail." At this, the giant was dumbfounded and led Jack to breakfast, bringing him a bowl that held at least 4 gallons of porridge, and commanding him, as a man of such courage, to eat it all. Now Jack, when travelling, wore under his cloak a leather bag to carry his belongings. Quick as thought, he repositioned this bag in front with the opening just under his chin, so as he ate, he could slip most of the porridge into it without the giant being any the wiser. They sat down to breakfast, the giant gobbling down his own measure of porridge, while Jack disposed of his. "Look," said crafty Jack when he had finished. "I'll show you a trick worth 2 of yours." With that, he took up a carving knife and, slicing open the leather bag, let all the porridge spill onto the floor. "Good heavens," cried the giant, determined not to be outdone. "I can do that myself." He seized the carving knife and, ripping open his own belly, fell down dead. Thus Jack was rid of the Welsh giant. Now, it happened that in those days, when gallant knights were always seeking adventures, King Arthur's only son, a very valiant prince, begged his father for a large sum of money to enable him to journey to Wales and strive to free a certain beautiful lady who was possessed by 7 evil spirits. Though the king initially refused, he finally gave way. The prince set out with 2 horses, one to ride, and the other laden with gold pieces. After several days' journey, the prince came to a market town in Wales, where there was a great commotion. Upon asking the reason, he was told that according to law, the corpse of a very generous man had been prevented from burial because in life he had owed large sums to money-lenders. "That is a cruel law," said the young prince. "Go, bury the dead in peace, and let the creditors come to my lodgings. I will pay the debts of the deceased." So the creditors came, but they were so numerous that by evening the prince had only 2 pence left and could not continue his journey. Jack the Giant Killer, passing through the town on his way to Wales, and hearing of the prince's plight, was so impressed by his kindness and generosity that he offered to become the prince's servant. This was agreed upon. The next morning, after Jack had paid their lodging with his last penny, they set out together. As they were leaving town, an old woman ran after the prince, calling out, "Justice, justice! The dead man owed me 2 pence. These 7 years, pay me as well as the others." So the prince, kind and generous, put his hand in his pocket and gave the old woman his last 2 pence. Now, they had not a penny between them, and when the sun grew low, the prince said, "Jack, since we have no money, how are we to get lodging for the night?" Jack replied, "We shall do well enough, master, for within 2 or 3 miles of this place lives a huge and monstrous giant with 3 heads, who can fight 400 men in armor and make them flee like chaff before the wind." "And how will that help us?" asked the prince. "He'll surely devour us in one bite." "No," said Jack, laughing. "Let me go and prepare the way for you. By all accounts, this giant is a fool. Perhaps I can manage better than you think." So the prince remained where he was, and Jack spurred his horse at full speed until he reached the giant's gate. At the gate, he knocked so loudly that the neighboring hills echoed. The giant roared from within, voice like thunder. "Who's there?" Then Jack said, as bold as brass, "None but your poor cousin Jack." "Cousin Jack?" exclaimed the giant, astounded. "And what news brings my poor cousin Jack?" He was quite taken back, so Jack hastened to reassure him. "Dear cousin, heavy news indeed." "Heavy news?" echoed the giant, half afraid. "No heavy news can touch me. Have I not 3 heads? Can I not fight 500 men in armor? Can I not make them fly like chaff before the wind? True, replied crafty Jack. But I came to warn you, because the great King Arthur's son, with 1,000 men in armor, is coming to kill you. At this, the giant began to shiver and shake. Ah, Cousin Jack, kind Cousin Jack, this is heavy news indeed. Tell me, what am I to do? Hide yourself in the vault, said crafty Jack, and I will lock and bolt and bar you in, keeping the key until the prince is gone. So you will be safe. And so the giant hurried down into the vault. Jack locked, bolted, and barred him in. Being thus secure, he fetched his master, and the two made themselves heartily merry with what the giant was to have for his supper, while the miserable giant shivered and shook with fright in the underground vault. After a good night's sleep, Jack woke his master early, and, having provided him well with gold and silver from the giant's treasure, told him to ride 3 miles forward on his journey. When Jack judged the prince was well out of range, he took the key and released his prisoner. The giant was half dead with cold and dampness, but very grateful, and he begged Jack to name what reward he would have for saving the giant's life and castle from destruction. "You're very welcome," said Jack, who always kept his wits about him. "All I want is the old coat and cap, together with the rusty old sword and slippers which are at your bedside." When the giant heard this, he sighed and shook his head. "You don't know what you're asking. But since I promised, you must have them. The coat will make you invisible. The cap will tell you all you want to know. The sword will cut through whatever you strike. And the slippers will take you wherever you want to go in the twinkling of an eye." So Jack, overjoyed, rode away with the coat, cap, the sword, and the slippers, and soon overtook his master. They rode on together until they reached the castle, where the beautiful lady lived whom the prince sought. She was indeed very beautiful, despite, of course, being possessed by 7 devils. And and when she heard the prince sought her as a suitor, she smiled and ordered a splendid banquet prepared for his reception. She sat at his right hand and plied him with food and drink. When the meal was over, she took out her own handkerchief, gently wiped his lips, saying with a smile, "I have a task for you, my lord. You must show me that handkerchief tomorrow morning, or lose your head." With that, she put the handkerchief in her bosom and said, "Good night." The prince was in despair, but Jack said nothing until his master was in bed. Then he put on the old cap he had gotten from the giant, and immediately he knew all he needed to know. So, in the dead of night, when the beautiful lady called upon one of her familiar spirits to carry her to Lucifer himself, Jack was ready for her. Putting on his coat of darkness and his slippers of swiftness, he arrived there as soon as she did. When she gave the handkerchief to the devil, bidding him keep it safe, and he placed it on a high shelf, Jack simply reached up and snatched it away in an instant. The next morning, when the beautiful enchanted lady expected to see the prince crestfallen, he made a fine bow and presented her with the handkerchief. At first, she was terribly disappointed, but as the day progressed, she ordered another, an even more splendid feast to be prepared. This time, when the meal was over, she kissed the prince full on the lips and said, "I have a task for you, my lover. Show me tomorrow morning the last lips I kissed tonight, or you lose your head." The prince, who by this time was head over heels in love, said tenderly, "If you will kiss none but mine, I will." The beautiful lady, for all she was possessed by 7 devils, could not help noticing that the prince was a very handsome young man. So she blushed a little and said, "That is neither here nor there. You must show me them, or death is your fate." So the prince went to bed as sorrowful as before. But Jack put on the cap of knowledge and knew in a moment all he needed to know. Thus, when in the dead of night the beautiful lady called on her familiar spirit to take her to Lucifer himself, Jack, in his coat of darkness and shoes of swiftness, was there before her. "You have betrayed me once," said the beautiful lady to Lucifer, frowning, "by letting my handkerchief be stolen. Now I will give you something none can steal, and so defeat the prince, king's son though he be." With that, she kissed the loathsome demon full on the lips and departed. Jack immediately struck off Lucifer's head with one blow of the rusty sword, and, hiding it under his coat of darkness, brought it back to his master. The next morning, when the beautiful lady asked the prince, with malice in her beautiful eyes, to show her the last lips she had kissed, he pulled out the demon's head by the horns. At that, the 7 devils which possessed the poor lady gave 7 dreadful shrieks and left her. Thus, the enchantment was broken. She appeared in all her perfect beauty and goodness. She and the prince were married the very next morning, after which they journeyed back to the court of King Arthur, where Jack the Giant Killer, for his many exploits, was made one of the Knights of the Round Table. This, however, did not satisfy our hero, who was soon on the road again, searching for giants. He had not gone far when he came upon one seated on a huge block of timber near the entrance to a dark cave. He was a most terrifying giant. His bulging eyes were like coals of fire, his countenance grim and gruesome, his cheeks, like huge slabs of bacon, were covered with stubble, the bristles of which resembled iron wire, while the locks of hair that fell on his massive shoulders looked like coiled snakes or hissing adders. He held a knotted iron club and breathed so heavily you could hear him a mile away. Nothing daunted by this fearsome sight, Jack dismounted from his horse and, putting on his coat of darkness, went up close to the giant and said softly, "Hello there. Is that you? It won't be long before I have you fast by your beard." So saying, he swung the sword of strength at the giant's head, but, somehow missing his aim, cut off the nose instead, clean as a whistle. My goodness, how the giant roared. It was like claps of thunder, and he began laying about him with the knotted iron club like one possessed. But Jack, in his coat of darkness, easily dodged the blows, and running behind, drove the sword up to the hilt into the giant's back, so that he fell stone dead. Jack then cut off the head and sent it to King Arthur by a wagoner he hired for the purpose, after which he began searching the giant's cave for treasure. He passed through many windings and turnings, until he came to a huge hall, paved and roofed with stone. At the upper end was an immense fireplace, where hung an iron cauldron, the like of which Jack had never seen for size. It was boiling and gave out a savory steam, while beside it, on the right, stood a massive table set with huge platters and mugs. Here, the giants used to dine. Going a little further, he came upon a sort of window barred with iron, and looking within, beheld a vast number of miserable captives. "Alas," they cried, "have you come, young man, to join us in this dreadful prison?" "That depends," said Jack. "But first, tell me why you are imprisoned here." "Through no fault of our own," they cried. "We are captives of the cruel giants, and are kept here, and well fed, until such time as the monsters desire a feast. Then they choose the fattest and dine upon them. Upon hearing this, Jack immediately unlocked the prison door and set the poor fellows free. Then, searching the giant's coffers, he divided the gold and silver equally among the captives as compensation for their sufferings, and, taking them to a neighboring castle, gave them a proper feast. As they were all making merry over their deliverance and praising Jack's prowess, a messenger arrived to say that one Thunderdell, a huge giant with 2 heads, having heard of the death of his kinsman, was coming from the northern dales seeking revenge, and was already within a mile or 2 of the castle. The country folk, with their flocks and herds, were fleeing before him like chaff before the wind. The castle with its gardens stood on a small island, surrounded by a moat 20 feet wide and 30 feet deep, with very steep sides. This moat was spanned by a drawbridge. And so, without delay, Jack ordered the bridge to be sawn on both sides at the middle, leaving only one plank uncut. Over this he passed swiftly in his invisible coat of darkness to meet his enemy. bearing in his hand the wonderful sword of strength. Though the giant could not see Jack, he could smell him, for giants have keen noses. Therefore Thunderdell cried out in a voice like his name, Fee, Fi, Fo, Fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread. Is that so? Said Jack, cheerful as ever. Then you must be a monstrous miller indeed. The giant, peering around everywhere for a glimpse of his foe, shouted, Are you indeed the villain who has killed so many of my kinsmen? Then I will tear you to pieces with my teeth and grind your bones to powder. You'll have to catch me first, said Jack, laughing. Throwing off his coat of darkness, putting on his slippers of swiftness, he began nimbly leading the giant a merry dance, leaping and dodging light as a feather, while the monster followed heavily, like a walking tower, so that the very foundations of the earth seemed to shake at every step. This game made the onlookers nearly split their sides with laughter, until Jack, judging that there had been enough sport, made for the drawbridge, ran neatly over the single plank, and reaching the other side, waited in teasing fashion for his adversary. The giant came at full speed, foaming at the mouth with rage and flourishing his club. But when he reached the middle of the drawbridge, his great weight naturally broke the plank, and there he was, fallen headlong into the moat, rolling and wallowing like a whale, plunging from place to place, yet unable to get out and be revenged. The spectators greeted his efforts with roars of laughter, and Jack himself was at first too overcome with merriment to do more than mock. At last, however, he fetched a rope, cast it over the giant's two heads, and with the help of a team of horses, drew him shoreward, where 2 blows from the sword of strength settled the matter. After some time spent in mirth and festivities, Jack began once more to grow restless. Taking leave of his companions, set out for fresh adventures. He travelled far and fast through woods, valleys, and hills, until at last he came late at night to a lonely house set at the foot of a high mountain. Knocking at the door, it was opened by an old man whose head was white as snow. "Father," said Jack, ever courteous, "can you lodge a traveller caught by nightfall?" "Yes, indeed, and welcome to my poor cottage," replied the old man. Jack came in, and after supper they sat together chatting in friendly fashion. Then the old man, seeing Jack's belt, said, "My son, you are the great conqueror of evil monsters. Now, close by, there lives one well worthy of your prowess. On the top of yonder high hill stands an enchanted castle, kept by a giant named Galligantua, who with the help of a wicked old magician lures many beautiful ladies and valiant knights into his castle, where they are transformed into all sorts of birds and beasts, even into fishes and insects. There, they live miserably in confinement. But most of all, I grieve for a duke's daughter whom they kidnapped from her father's garden, bringing her here in a burning chariot drawn by fiery dragons. Her form is that of a white deer, and though many valiant knights have tried their utmost to break the spell and free her, none have succeeded. For at the entrance to the castle are two dreaded griffins who destroy everyone who attempt to pass them. Jack thought of the coat of darkness which had served him so well before, and he put on the cap of knowledge. In an instant, he knew what had to be done. The very next morning at dawn, Jack arose and put on his invisible cloak and his slippers of swiftness. The twinkling of an eye, there he was, on top of the mountain. There were the two griffins guarding the castle gates. Horrible creatures with forked tails and tongues. But they could not see him because of the coat of darkness, so he passed them unharmed. Hanging on the doors of the gateway, he found a golden trumpet on a silver chain, and beneath it was engraved in red lettering, "Whoever shall this trumpet blow will cause the giant's overthrow. The black enchantment he will break, and gladness out of sadness make." No sooner had Jack read these words than he put the horn to his lips and blew out. The very first note, the castle trembled to its very foundations. Before he had finished the tune, both the giant and the magician were biting their thumbs and tearing their hair, knowing that their wickedness was now come to an end. But the giant showed fight and took up his club to defend himself, whereupon Jack, with one clean cut of the sword of strength, severed his head from his body. He would doubtless have done the same to the magician, but the latter was a coward, and calling up a whirlwind, swept away into the air. He has never been seen or heard of since. The enchantments being thus broken, all the valiant knights and beautiful ladies who had been transformed into birds and beasts and fishes and reptiles and insects returned to their proper shapes, including the Duke's daughter, who, from being a white deer, showed as the most beautiful maiden upon whom the sun ever shone. No sooner had this occurred, the whole castle vanished away in a cloud of smoke. From that moment, giants vanished also from the land. So Jack, when he had presented the head of Galligantua to King Arthur, together with all the lords and ladies he had delivered from the enchantment, found that he had nothing more to do. As a reward for past services, however, King Arthur bestowed the hand of the Duke's daughter upon honest Jack the giant killer. So they were married, and the whole kingdom was filled with joy at their wedding. Furthermore, King Arthur bestowed upon Jack a noble castle with a magnificent estate, whereon he, his lady, and their children lived in great joy and contentment for the rest of their days.